Here for the second week of strategy here for the capstone course for 583. I wanted to run through for just a moment or two here some useful information that is going to be exceedingly helpful for you to better understand how strategy works in the open market. When we talk a little bit about strategy, I want you to understand that there are forces that are going to affect your strategy both positively and negatively. These include uncontrollable environmental factors. These are described on the left-hand portion of the screen in the Venn diagram, known as PESTLE, standing for political, economic, social economic, technological, and legal. What we have are political forces and economic forces each and every day weighing against the corporate strategy. We have a vision, we have a reason why we're in business, and we know where we want to go. However, there are demonic forces that tend to plague on us each and every day. These are not only the economic forces, the technological forces, and the legal forces, but to the right side of the Venn diagram, you also see competition. There are competitive issues that occur in every single market every single day, such as Target and Walmart, or Mobile and Amico, or Toys R Us and many of the toys that are available through Amazon, and even Amazon and eBay, and some of the other portals where you can acquire items. It's absolutely essential that when we are attempting to build a strategy for an organization, we understand our strengths and limitations, and at times we do an internal analysis to really understand where we are at this particular point in time and where we need to go. All the while knowing why we are in business, our driving force, what keeps us there at all times. Now, what's very important to understand is how this entire illustration of strategy actually even started. Strategy really comes from the starts of the Industrial Revolution. It began basically with a clear understanding of Henry Fayol when he looked at work and divisions of work coming from the Industrial Revolution and looking how managers and operators utilize their techniques to get people to do jobs that they needed to do. This included items such as division of work, or authority, discipline. But if you notice in looking at this list, what's interesting about this is the fact that this entire list is focused specifically on managers and employees, not necessarily about the organization itself. It wasn't until 1954 where, at the time, the management guru Peter Drucker wrote a wonderful book that I highly recommend called The Practice of Management, in which he said, the first responsibility of top management is to ask the question, what is our business? And what he was interested in is better understanding how the business was serving its most important asset, its vital asset, the customer. Notice that he wrote that the answer was determined by the customer because it's the customer that controls the 8 goals of the business, such as market standing, innovation, productivity, physical and financial resources, worker performance, attitude, profitability, manager performance and development, and public responsibility. It was the first time that somebody like Drucker took the obligations off of management and employees and actually focused it on 2 things. Number 1, clearly the organization, and number 2, what the intent of the organization was to be, and that was the customer. It was then in the 80s that social psychologist Henry Mintzberg then really took Peter Drucker's principles and understood that strategy was a plan. Strategy itself was a pattern, and it was an opportunity to create an offense and a defense so that your organization can achieve an intended set of goals and move in a certain way. And it was the modality and it was the pathway that Mintzberg looked at that then said, we have something here. Because what we're attempting to do realistically is move individuals and use the organization as that defensive shield in which to move those individuals to outwit, outsmart, and play upon our competitors. Well, it was then after Mintzberg wrote his series of articles that in 1987, Michael Porter, who is a full-time professor at Harvard University, then wrote an article, which I'll get to momentarily here, who wrote something asking two very specific questions. Number one, what business should the corporation be in? And number two, how should the corporate office manage its business units? It now started to compartmentalize. It now started to look at strategy as truly a ploy, a pathway to business success. And so Porter then developed something known as the 5 forces of strategy, looking at everything from the perspective that we have on a daily basis competitive rivalries. And those competitive rivalries start with 4 very specific ideologies. They include the threat of new entries. In other words, there's nothing new under the sun. There's always going to be somebody coming in trying to offload who the top leader in that field is. Number 2, we will always have a threat of substitution. There will always be somebody trying to knock off Amazon because they think that they have a better mousetrap. Somebody such as Android trying to knock off a Windows or an Apple in the operating systems because customers are asking for something else, something as a substitution for that. You see that in the rivalry for cell phones. You see that amongst the rivalry of computers. You see that now even with the coffee wars. You have Caldi's, you have Starbucks, you have Seattle's Best. There's always a substitute. And last but not least, we can then look at competition from the perspective of supplier and buyer power. There is always going to be the threat of supplier power because there are always new suppliers that are out there in the field. Those that can provide for us technology, cost advantages, and lowering our cost of acquisition so that we don't have to spend as much money. When it comes to buyer power, we can look to see how the gravitational pull goes towards what the customers are looking for. Customers form a community. That community then empowers the brand. To a certain extent, it manifests the brand. And so if we're not constantly evolving where the customers are, we might actually lose our competitive position. Definitely worth the study, and definitely the first time that strategy was discussed in terms of a process. It was then in 2000 that 2 gentlemen, also from Harvard University and also principals at Harvard, wrote a book known as Blue Ocean Strategy, which looked at how companies traditionally work in either blue oceans or red oceans, and that organizations really need to work in a marketplace that berids themselves of competitors so they can be more efficient and more effective. What happened with Blue Ocean Strategy is there was this notion of 4 dynamic principles: eliminate, raise, reduce, and create. Eliminate. Which factors can you eliminate that your industry has long competed on? Raise. Which factors should be raised well above the industry standard? Reduce. Which factors should be reduced well below the industry standard? And finally, create. Which factors should be created that the industry has never offered before? And to that extent, I'm providing for you 2 examples. Example number 1 are Crocs. When you look at Crocs, the interesting thing about Crocs is that these are neon-colored shoes that are made of rubber, that don't require boxes, that are not hand-sewn, that to a certain extent are a lot of fun, are very inexpensive, and sold differently than how you would acquire many other shoes. And it's an interesting notion to look at how Crocs became a $10 billion company simply by using blue ocean strategy. The second principle, depending upon your age, I'm not certain how many of you have ever gone to the circus. But many of us, and I'm 58, grew up with Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus. And if you've ever seen the recent movie and soon to be play, Greatest Showman, which really is focused and centered on P.T. Barnum, the gentleman that started that, the interesting thing is that there is another company that has completely obliterated Barnum and Bailey and, quite honestly, has used blue ocean to do it. Do you know who I'm talking about? If you got it, good for you. If not, I'll give you the hint. It's a Canadian firm that's a multi-billion-dollar firm and has literally stripped away the rings of the circus, stripped away the showmaster, really raised the audience's attention by creating something completely different. And that is every show is based on a theme. Every show has a tremendous amount of music. And there has been a reduction in terms of animals in shows. There has been an elimination of the cannons. There's been an elimination of tigers and elephants and other items. And if you know what I'm talking about, you know I'm talking about Cirque du Soleil. Yes, the circus started by Guy de Lillibastard up in Canada and is just a remarkable explanation of blue ocean strategy. And last but not least is then a strategy from a management consulting firm, and specifically written by a gentleman called Benjamin Trigo, who with a partner developed a firm known as Kepner Trigo. In this firm, they say four things. They say first that companies exist for a raison d'etre. In other words, there's a reason for existence, a driving force. And that driving force then is one of three items. Either A, products and services, B, capabilities, and C, growth. Now, you may say to me that many organizations are in business to make money, and to that I will say to you two things. One, it's incorrect, or at least I'd like you to think of it as incorrect, for number one, what I said about Peter Drucker before, and that is the purpose of business is the acquisition of customers. And number two, you can't grow unless you have reasons for growth, and that would be products and services that you offer or the capabilities that you have, according to Kepner Trigo. So if you focus on products, you might be an organization such as Mattel, who only makes toys. If you're in the services division, you're somebody like Charter, and you're delivering of service or even Spectrum today. You're delivering cable or wireless internet services. If you're into markets, we could look at Amazon and we could say that Amazon has created a distribution chain based upon different markets that exist in the field. This is where products and services come in. Where capabilities come in, you can look at being the lowest cost producer of something. Maybe it's dairy, maybe it's soybean, maybe it's even petrochemicals. It could be the method of sale or even distribution. Here we might consider something like Walmart or Amazon, and that's because they're more of a logistics company than anything else. For firms such as Intel, AMD, Dell, Apple, well, shoot, these are all technology companies. That is the reason why they exist. They happen to make money because of their technology. But the reasons for their existence is simply that, technology. You could even be a company that's introduced to natural resources, coal manufacturers, solar energy manufacturers using wind-aided energy or water-aided energy. You might even be a water company and you're needing spring water like Delsani or Aquafina. But the rationale of why you're in business is specifically because you have that accessibility to the natural resources. And last but not least, when we look at growth or profit, most of these organizations are then organizations that make money from other people's money, such as Bank of America, which we know is a retail banking system, or even GE, for the most part, who exists with a diversified portfolio for one reason, and that is to be number one in every single market. So these are some of the strategic methods that you can employ for organizations. There are other strategic methods that you might be able to use as well, which include a low-cost strategy. In other words, where you're lowering overall costs that rival comparable products. Companies such as the Dollar General stores and dollar stores and $5 and below are stores that do that, where their entire strategy is to be low cost. Or you might have a differentiation strategy where your product offerings are completely different and show that competitive differentiation to rivals. These could be suppliers, logistics companies, they could be petroleum manufacturing company, operational standards companies. And then the list goes on and on with the type of organizations that you can have. There is no one method in running a strategy for all organizations. Each organization can choose the strategy that they desire in order to be the most cost conscious, the most competitive, and gain the best customer appeal. When it comes to strategy, I want to provide for you some best practices. And that is, first, have the right people in the room. This goes back to a great book that was written in the 90s as I was conducting my doctoral research by Jim Collins, and it was called Good to Great. Jim talks about having the right people on the bus, and that can not be further from the truth. You have to have the right people in the room in order to create a proper strategy. 2, you need to have mission, vision, and values, something that we discussed in the first week of the course. Vision and values are absolutely vital. Vision is where you want to take the company. Values are your core beliefs, and mission is the manifestation of that vision in order to bring things to success. But what you also have to do, 3 very important items that exist here. Number 1, you have to have a set of short and long-term goals. Number 2, you have to have key performance indicators to ensure that those goals are met, or at least you're charging ahead towards those goals. And last but not least, you need a way to check in. You need forms of accountability. You need to ensure that you have the right team moving the items forward so that you can check your progress, obtain the feedback that you need, and move forward with the direction. One last thing here, and that is strategy and these best practices will work as long as you're keeping your eye on the prize. You have been told for many years, perhaps, that strategy is a 5 to 7 year process. And strategy is going to fail when it looks too far out into the future. Your best modalities for keeping strategy right where it needs to be is when you keep strategy focused on one thing. The short term, such as 18 to 36 months, because if you need to make changes, you can make them quickly. I started this presentation with uncontrollable factors, and when you're constantly keeping your eye on the prize with respect to economics, political issues, technological issues, competitive issues, you can quickly change if needed to. If you keep your focus beyond that 5 years, things are going to change relatively quickly. I look forward to seeing you next week. Have a blessed rest of the week.